Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. Because we bought a small bottle of red wine, my son-in-law, David, lashed out at my husband, James. Do you have any idea how much gas I could have filled up with that money? A whole tank easily. I've said it over and over. Cut back on spending, save wherever you can. But you two throw money around like it grows on trees, wasting it on luxury nonsense. My daughter Rachel chimed in, clearly irritated. Mom, why didn't you talk to me first? Do you think our finances can handle you two spending like this? I watched the color slowly drain from James's face. His expression darkened bit by bit until all I could see was quiet humiliation. My anger surged. I couldn't hold back anymore. I pointed directly at David's wristwatch, the one that cost him over $6,000, and then at Rachel's handbag, the designer one she proudly flaunted worth at least $5,000. You two love preaching about saving money, don't you? Then tell me, how much did that watch cost, David? And Rachel, what about that purse you're carrying? James, and I get nearly $7,000 in retirement income every month. And now you're telling us we can't even enjoy a simple bottle of wine? Whose money are you so desperate to save? Whose lives are you trying to cut back? We worked our whole lives just to give you a better one. We sacrificed so much, but this wasn't the kind of old age we imagined, being humiliated by our own children. Later that day, James and I quietly packed our things and left the house. And just like that, they panicked. That day, we went grocery shopping and happened to walk past a wine promotion. James stood in front of the red wine display for a long time, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He'd always had a soft spot for those small batch reds with vintage labels, but in all the years we'd been living at Rachel's, he barely touched a drop. A complicated mix of emotions stirred in me. I walked over and quietly picked out his favorite bottle, placing it in our shopping basket. He followed me, starting to say something, but stopping halfway. I gave him a gentle smile. Honey, it's our wedding anniversary. A little good wine to celebrate. What's the harm? After dinner, just as James was about to open the bottle, Rachel and David walked through the door. The moment the door opened, the smell of alcohol drifted in. David stumbled into the living room, clearly drunk. I frowned instinctively, an unwelcome wave of irritation rising in my chest. He walked over to the dining table, then stopped abruptly and stared at the bottle. You bought this? He asked sharply. James forced a small smile. It's been a while since we've had a drink together. Thought we'd celebrate. But David immediately exploded. That bottle cost enough to fill up my gas tank. James quickly tried to explain it was on sale, just over $30. David's face darkened. His voice stayed loud and cutting. Over $30, and you think that's cheap? I wouldn't even buy it for myself. I've been saying this all along. Everything's getting expensive. We need to cut back, but you two, you don't care about any of it. Then he turned and snapped at Rachel. Why aren't you keeping your parents in check? Rachel didn't hesitate to jump in. Dad, that was really irresponsible. Why didn't you talk to me first? You know how tight things are right now. Owen's starting school soon. David's project is still short on funding. There's money going out in every direction, and you're wasting it on this. I looked at James. Just moments ago, he'd been so cheerful, and now his face was sinking into sadness. A spark ignited in my chest. I stood up and said calmly but firmly, I bought the wine. It had nothing to do with your father. I turned to them, fury boiling just beneath my voice. You keep talking about saving money. Then what about your $6,000 watch, David, or your $5,000 purse, Rachel? And let's be honest, those were charged to our retirement card. David tried to justify himself. That's different. I need the watch to look professional for work. Rachel spoke up, unapologetic. Dad, if I walked into the office with a cheap bag, people would laugh at me. I was shaking with anger. You all have your reasons, but what about us? James and I receive nearly $7,000 a month in retirement, and you're telling us we're not even allowed to enjoy a bottle of wine? Whose life are you trying to budget? Or are you just stripping us of our dignity? Owen burst into tears, frightened by the shouting. James scooped him up, trying to soothe him, murmuring, Please, let's not fight. It's just a bottle of wine. If it's such a big deal, I'll see if the store will take it back tomorrow. No, I said coldly, staring straight at Rachel and David. We're not at an age where we need to ask for permission to enjoy our lives. That wine, I've earned it. And let me tell you this, if you want money, go earn it yourself. Don't hang your hopes on us. If you really want to call yourself a daughter, then start acting like one. And with that, I took James by the hand and walked back to our room. That bottle of wine? James never drank it. The next morning, he quietly gave it to our neighbors next door. Later that morning, David showed up looking sheepish and remorseful. I had too much to drink last night, he muttered. Said a bunch of stupid things. I feel awful. Then he actually slapped himself twice and mumbled, I'm a damn fool. Rachel followed right behind him, wearing a look of exaggerated guilt. We both had some wine last night too, she said. We didn't mean to be so harsh. Dad, Mom, please don't take it to heart, okay? I looked at their forced smiles and overly performative apologies and let out a cold snort. I didn't even bother to meet their eyes. Rachel noticed my indifference and immediately looked grieved. She turned to James. Dad, James sighed and gently patted my shoulder, speaking softly. We're family, Emily. There's no need to hold on to grudges. Overnight, let it go. His words eased a bit of the fire in my chest. Seeing the mood begin to thaw, Rachel quickly seized the moment. It's been a while since we all went out together. We got the day off. Why don't we go out and get some fresh air? James, always the peacemaker, seemed eager to smooth things over and insisted we join them. We didn't plan to shop much, just a casual stroll, but when we reached downtown, a vintage clothing store caught my eye. The display window showcased a white dress with delicate blue floral patterns. I couldn't help but linger. James noticed my gaze and chuckled softly. You like it? I nodded. He immediately opened the door and gently nudged me inside. The shop was filled with beautiful vintage dresses, elegant prints, and fine fabrics. The one I'd been admiring hung right in the center. I walked over and brushed my fingers across the fabric, already falling in love with it. It was exactly the kind of style I used to adore when I was younger, but ever since we moved in with Rachel and started helping care for Owen, I hadn't worn anything like it. I still remember David once sneering at me. What are you trying to pull wearing those floral dresses? It's not like you're on vacation. After that, I'd stopped wearing them altogether. James seemed to notice my hesitation. He waved over a store clerk. Can you help my wife find her size in this one? I hesitated. At my age, wouldn't this kind of dress look silly on me? James gave me a warm, steady smile. You used to love this style. What makes you think it's not right for you now? The clerk chimed in encouragingly. Every age has its own charm. You've got beautiful skin and a graceful air. This dress would look stunning on you. With their reassurance, I stepped into the fitting room. When I walked out in the dress, the clerk's eyes lit up. She clapped her hands with delight. Absolutely gorgeous. It's like it was made just for you. Nervously, I turned to James. What do you think? He looked at me with such tenderness in his eyes. Just as beautiful as ever. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of the woman in that familiar style of dress. And in that moment, I felt like I'd rediscovered a piece of myself. My confidence, my grace, the woman I'd almost forgotten. Just as I was about to pull out my card to pay, Rachel and David found us and walked into the store. They were both lugging several large high-end shopping bags. Rachel, catching her breath, complained, Ugh, this is exhausting. Mom, Dad, why did you wander off like that? We've been searching all over. We're done shopping. Let's just head home. David was fanning his collar, clearly irritated and in no mood to be out. As Rachel stepped closer, her eyes landed on the vintage floral dress I was wearing. She froze for a second, her eyes widening as she scanned the store, then marched over to the display rack, flipping through the price tags. Mom, at your age, is this really appropriate? She said with a forced smile, her voice edged with condescension. The smile on my face faltered. What's inappropriate about it? James shot back with a cold chuckle. Is it really the style you have a problem with, or the price? He pointed at the shopping bags in their hands. It's totally reasonable for you to spend hundreds on whatever you want, but the moment your mother buys a dress, it's suddenly a problem. Rachel's expression changed instantly. She quickly tucked the bags behind her back, forcing a smile in my direction. Mom, I didn't mean it like that. I was just being honest. Don't take it personally. You're 65. This dress is a bit too flashy for you. It doesn't exactly say graceful. She gestured toward the people walking past outside. Look around. Everyone's dressed simply. Comfort is what matters. And besides, you're always cooking, doing laundry, and chasing after Owen. How is a dress like that even practical? Her eyes drifted over to James, and she muttered under her breath. And with that short haircut, honestly, it just looks odd. James's face hardened. You ungrateful girl. Do you even remember why your mother cut her hair? She used to love her long hair. His words struck something deep in me. Yes, I used to wear it long, always. But when I started caring for Owen, he'd constantly grab my hair and tug at it until I winced. James scolded him for it, but Rachel and David couldn't care less about me. They only worried the child might get scratched by my hair. They even blamed me for it. In the end, I gave in and cut it off. I never grew it out again. The store clerk quickly stepped in, trying to ease the tension. Actually, short hair has its own elegance. With a vintage dress like this, it highlights a woman's character. There's grace and confidence in that pairing. Rachel let out a sarcastic laugh. Of course you'd say that. You're trying to make a sale? You people could sell snow to an Eskimo. He turned back to me. Mom, I just passed a store earlier with clothes that looked super soft and lightweight, and they're on sale, way cheaper than this stuff. That style might suit you better. We're walking past it anyway. Let's just stop in and take a look. The clerk looked embarrassed, offering only a polite smile before quietly stepping back behind the counter. David chimed in as well. Honestly, buying a dress like this is just a waste. You'd get more value putting that money towards some good whiskey or a few fine cigars for me. In that moment, all I felt was pure, bone-deep disappointment. Everything became so painfully clear. That bottle of wine, this dress, or anything we might ever want to buy for ourselves, in their eyes, it would always be wasteful. Only when the money was spent on them did it become reasonable or worthwhile. As James was still arguing with them, I quietly stepped into the fitting room and changed back into my dull gray dress, the one Rachel always called practical and appropriate. When I came out, the spark from my face was gone. That smile I'd worn in the mirror just moments ago had faded to nothing but a pale shadow. James saw it, and his expression fell. Without saying a word, he pulled out his wallet and handed the store clerk our savings card. We'll take the dress, he said, and please pick out a few more in her size. We'll take them all. Rachel and David. Dee's faces changed instantly. I gently reached for James's hand. He looked at me, steady and resolute. After we paid, we walked out without looking back. On the way home, neither of us spoke. We stared out the window in silence. In the distance, the sun was sinking slowly behind the horizon. I turned to look at James, and the fading light painted his face with a soft, solemn gray. My chest ached with a dull heaviness. I reached over and took his hand without thinking. He looked at me, puzzled. I gave a small shake of my head. I'm fine, I whispered, but deep down, I knew something in me had shifted completely and irrevocably. That night, Rachel and David went out again for another social dinner. At the dinner table, it was just James and me, with Owen sitting nearby, watching cartoons and refusing to eat. James sat there quietly, his plate untouched, his face clouded in silence. James, I said softly, looking at him. He lifted his head. His eyes were heavy with fatigue. James, let's go back home, I said to him with a soft yet firm voice. He froze for a moment, a flicker of light flashing in his eyes, but then it faded as if something suddenly came to mind and snuffed it out. I knew exactly what he was thinking. Just then, Owen jumped over to my side, his eyes lighting up. Grandma, did you just say you're going somewhere? Are you moving out? Are you really leaving? I paused for a second and smiled faintly. Maybe, sweetheart, but why are you so excited about that? Owen clapped his hands, beaming. Of course I'm excited. Once you leave, Grandpa Jay and Grandma Anna can come live here. He went on, cheerful and completely unaware of the chill settling over my heart. They love me so much. Every time we visit their house, they give me all kinds of snacks, popcorn, Skittles, soda. But you guys never buy that stuff? I heard Dad talking. He said once we move into the big house, you'd go back to your hometown and then Grandpa Jay and Grandma Anna can come live here. So if you're leaving now, does that mean I get to see them sooner?" He bounced in place, practically glowing with excitement. Each word hit me like ice water. Jay and Anna, David's parents. So the grandparents Owen loved most were the ones who rarely saw him, not the ones who cared for him every single day. Rachel and David had been planning to enroll Owen in that prestigious elementary school, but the homes near the school were expensive, well beyond what their savings could cover. Even what James and I had set aside wasn't enough for a down payment. Their plan, I now realized, was clear: sell our old house back home to cover the down payment, drain our savings to renovate the new house, and then once they sold the place they currently lived in, use that money to cover the mortgage. We only have one child, Rachel, and we'd always assumed everything we had would go to her someday. It felt natural, even right. But no, had David ever thought about what would happen to us once our old house was sold? Where'd we go? That house hadn't been lived in for over a decade. It was falling apart, probably uninhabitable now. I stared at Owen's beaming little face, and all I felt was cold. "Does your mom know about all this?" I asked softly. "Of course," Owen replied without hesitation. "Mom said she's going to take Grandpa and Grandma out to explore the city. They've never been here before." That night, James and I ate in silence. Rachel and David came home late again. I heard the noise in the living room. There was no need to guess. They'd clearly been drinking. I sat in bed for a long time, turning everything over in my mind, until finally my thoughts settled into something sharp and clear. I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning. I turned on my side, looking at James. "Do you remember what we used to talk about before retirement?" I reached up and gently brushed the silver strands of his temple. Then I leaned close and whispered in his ear. James froze, his eyes suddenly wide with surprise. I simply gave him a quiet smile and held his hand tighter. No more words were needed. Everything was decided. Not long ago, the old house we listed with a real estate agency finally found a buyer. The moment Rachel and David heard the news, they were overjoyed and insisted on going to see the property themselves. They were practically buzzing with excitement when I told them that James and I would be handling the sale in person. They agreed without hesitation. David even offered to drive us to the airport. Just before we left, Rachel reminded us again and again not to worry about Owen and to take care of business quickly so we could finalize the sale. David handed me a bank card and said, "Have the buyer transfer the payment to this account. It's going toward the new house anyway." With their hopeful eyes fixed on us, James and I set off for our hometown. But just before boarding, I tossed that bank card into a trash bin at the airport. The first thing we did when we got back was open a new bank account and route our retirement payments there. Over the next few days, we finalized the house sale and cleared out most of our belongings, except for a few old jackets James had always loved. Everything else we left behind. 2 weeks later, the southern coast was warm and breezy in the evening. James and I sat on the porch of the small cottage we'd rented, sipping freshly brewed coffee and enjoying dinner together. That's when James's phone rang. It was Rachel. He answered, and before he could say a word, her voice came through the line, full of irritation. "Dad, it's been 2 weeks. Has the house sold or not? When are you coming back?" She sounded frantic. "We've already picked out the new place, but it's a hot market. The agent's only holding it for a few more days. We practically begged for that. If you don't sign the contract soon, we're going to lose it." She paused for a second, then added, "And by the way, your retirement money didn't come through this month. You'd better call the bank and find out what went wrong." James calmly set down his utensils and wiped his mouth with a napkin before answering. "All right," he said casually, "there's something we forgot to tell you. Your mother and I decided to take a trip. We're not coming back." There was a pause on the other end, then her voice shot up an octave. "What? You're not coming back? As for that new house you want," James continued, his tone steady, "we don't think it's necessary, especially since you don't really have the savings to afford it, do you? And that retirement check you're asking about, it went through just fine, just not to the account you're thinking of. We've changed it." Silence. A few seconds later, Rachel's voice returned, now sharp and shrill. James pulled the phone slightly away from his ear, but her words still rang out clearly. "What are you talking about? The house isn't sold. You're not coming back." You've moved the retirement money. What are we supposed to do? He was shouting now. Dad, answer me. Mom, are you there? Mom? James hung up without a word. Within seconds, my phone lit up too, but James reached over, declined the call, and turned the phone to silent. I stared at the screen for a moment, hesitating. Then I asked quietly, James, are we really doing the right thing? What if Rachel hates us for this? What if she never forgives us? I sighed deeply. James took my hand in his and said gently, I know what you're worried about. You're thinking she's our only daughter. She's the child we poured our love into, the hope of our lives. Everything we saved, everything we worked for, it all felt like it should go to her. And for years, you've given her everything she asked for without hesitation. I used to think that was just what parents do, but they've made it very clear our kindness doesn't mean anything to them. If we gave them our house and our retirement money, do you really think we have a place in their future? Can you honestly say they'd care for us when we needed them most? I sat in silence for a long while, his words echoing in my mind. He said quietly, we give up everything out of fear. Fear of aging, fear of illness, fear of death. So we convince ourselves that it's safer to depend on them, to hand over control and hope they'll carry us through. But what we get in return, do you really think it would have been better than this? That evening, I sat alone in the yard for a long, long time. The final streaks of sunset faded into the horizon, and slowly the night crept in. The next morning, I brushed my hair neatly and slipped into my favorite dress. When James saw me standing tall again and with a quiet confidence in my posture, he finally let out a long breath of relief. From that day forward, the world gained a pair of sunset companions, a couple who had fully walked away from the chaos of family life, living simply and solely for themselves. We rented a cozy little house with a garden in a warm, peaceful southern town, just steps away from a calm, glistening lake. Each morning, we walked along the lake's edge, sometimes biking, sometimes jogging. Afterward, we'd head to the local farm market to pick out fresh ingredients. If we had extra time after the market, we'd hop in the car and drive to neighboring towns, wooded trails, or quiet bays, chasing glimpses of nature's beauty. James would wear his favorite relaxed button-down shirts and wide-brimmed hat, and I'd bring along my camera, capturing the calm and grace that now rested between his eyes. I began taking care of myself again. For 4 years at Rachel's, I'd worn loose, drab clothes and had my hair cut short for convenience. Nothing more. But now I let it grow out again. I don't mind the ease of short hair, I told James one day, gently brushing my fingers through the strands, but I miss the softness and grace of long hair as it reached the nape of my neck. I began pinning it up in the elegant style I used to love, pairing it with my favorite vintage dresses. James would always look at me and smile. You're even more beautiful now than you were back then, he'd say. After lunch, we'd take a short nap, and in the afternoons, James would settle by the window with a book while I immersed myself in learning photography and video editing. We each slipped into our own little worlds, and before we knew it, the whole afternoon would drift quietly by. Every few weeks, we'd take a short trip exploring small towns, coastal roads, and quiet harbors. Our footprints slowly marked the map of everywhere we'd wandered together. On one of those trips, we met a young man named Chris, a traveling content creator. Out of curiosity, I looked up his social media account. He had over 20 million followers. What made us laugh was that he quickly declared himself my biggest fan, begging me to let him call me his godmother. I always thought vintage style belonged to people like my mom, he said, but meeting you made me realize true style is something you live, not just wear. His mother and grandmother had both been passionate about vintage culture. So when he met a woman around his mother's age who still held on to her own sense of beauty and identity, he felt an unexpected warmth and respect. Since then, I became not just the subject of James's quiet photographs, but also the muse in Chris's vibrant lens. With my permission, he posted a few clips of us online, and to everyone's surprise, the videos caught on like wildfire. It was because of those clips, those gentle, quiet snapshots of our life, that Rachel and David, after more than half a year of silence, finally came looking for us. They arrived exhausted, with bloodshot eyes, clearly having had little to no sleep the night before. Over the past 6 months, Rachel and David had called countless times and sent dozens of messages. I ignored every one of them, so their panicked expressions now didn't surprise me in the least. "Dad!" Rachel rushed in the moment the door opened, her voice urgent and strained, her face twisted with a tangle of emotions. "You and Mom just disappeared without a word. We've been searching everywhere. I even went all the way back to the old house. It's sold now, and still you're not coming back. Why, Dad?" I didn't say a word. He walked straight out to the garden and dropped into a chair, like the mere act of finding me had resolved everything. Just then, I stepped outside and took a seat at the table. Rachel stared at me for several seconds before finally speaking. Mom, David, who had been slouched in the chair, suddenly straightened. His eyes flicked toward James, then to me, scratching his head awkwardly. "Well, that's really good to see you again, Catherine. You look younger than ever." I barely recognized you. I let out a cold snort and said nothing. "If you got something to say it now. We're heading to the morning market soon." Only then did Rachel and David seem to realize we weren't in the mood for pleasantries. Rachel jumped to her feet. "What market? Let's unpack and go home already. It's been over 6 months. You missed your chance on the last house we picked, and now it's gone. We just found another one. Not quite as nice, but good enough. We need to get moving on this. Once we're back, we can put down the money and lock it in." So, that was what they really came for. They didn't come to see us. They came to see the money. I simmered internally and didn't bother responding. David shot Rachel a subtle look. She caught on immediately and slid over next to me, looping her arm through mine with forced affection. "Mom, are you still mad about the dress? I swear I had no idea how much you liked vintage styles, and honestly, you look stunning in them. If you want, I'll get you a few every season, different styles to switch it up." "Okay." He paused, letting out a sigh. "Owen's been crying every day, saying he misses you too. He's barely eating, he's lost weight. It's breaking my heart. You raised him from the start. He can't live without you. Don't you care?" I smiled faintly. "If I like a dress, I can buy it myself. As for Owen, there's more than one person in his life who can love him. All I want now is to spend the rest of my days peacefully with your dad." Then I gently pulled my arm away from hers and stood up. "You should go," I said calmly, walking over to the garden gate. My voice was cool, sharp, and final. "Live within your means. If you want a house, pay for it yourselves. We're not coming back." Rachel froze for a second, then sprang to her feet, face flushed with frustration, her voice rising with hostility. "So that's it? You're really cutting us off? What happens when you're old and sick? Who's going to take care of you then?" "We never counted on you for that," I said plainly, waving my hand as if swatting away a fly. Then I turned to David, my tone shifting slightly. "You brought your parents over, haven't you?" He blinked in surprise, giving me a sideways glance before slowly nodding. I gave a soft, knowing laugh. "You didn't even need to ask. We stepped aside all on our own now. You got your whole little family back together early." I bet Owen's thrilled. His eyes widened in shock, his entire body frozen in place. Rachel's face went pale, her expression mirroring his, stiff, stunned, and speechless. Just then, a familiar voice rang out at the gate. "Hey, Catherine. James. Weren't we supposed to hit the farmer's market together this morning? What happened?" Chris appeared at the entrance, grinning as he walked into the garden. The moment he stepped in, he came face to face with Rachel and David. He froze for a second, then quickly pieced things together. "Oh, so it's you too. No wonder they skipped the market today." Then he turned to me with a cheerful smile. "Kath, aren't you going to introduce me to your friends?" David's expression instantly twisted with fury. "Oh, I see how it is," he spat, laughing bitterly as he jabbed a finger in Chris's direction. "No wonder you two don't want to come back home. You've been completely charmed by this punk. You think I don't see what's going on here? You cozying up to two old people, pretending to be all sweet. Don't think I don't know what you're after. You're after their money, aren't you? Do you even know whose money that is? You've got some nerve, you little leech." And then, like a bull seeing red, David charged straight at Chris. My heart clenched. David was tall and heavy-set, while Chris, though young, was lean and wiry. If it came down to a fight, I wasn't sure he could handle it. I started to get up to intervene, Then came a loud, sharp thud. In one clean, fluid motion, Chris flipped David over his shoulder and slammed him onto the ground. David landed hard and groaned in pain, sprawled across the garden, unable to get up. Chris dusted off his sleeves, glancing down at him with a frown. Seriously? That's all you've got? James and I were frozen for a second, then both burst into laughter. Who would have thought this soft-spoken young man was such a powerhouse? Rachel and David left empty-handed and thoroughly humiliated. Despite their resentment, they could do nothing but slink away in defeat. A few days later, James and I packed our bags again, ready for our next journey. Just then, Chris brought us an invitation from his mother. After seeing my photos and his videos, she'd expressed a strong desire to meet me. We gave a little thought, then happily accepted. When we arrived in the seaside city and stepped into her home, I was stunned. Chris's mother turned out to be someone I'd admired for years, renowned vintage fashion designer Claire Stone. Back when I was still working, I had stumbled upon one of her vintage runway shows online. I'd been mesmerized by the elegant silhouettes and intricate detailing. From that day on, I'd quietly dreamed of one day wearing one of her creations, but life got in the way. Family responsibilities, endless chores, and that dream was slowly tucked away. Now, standing here, I felt nothing but gratitude for the choices I'd made. I had finally returned to living for myself. Claire and I connected instantly. We spoke at length about vintage fashion, femininity, and the art of timeless style. She took me through her studio, pausing in front of a mannequin draped with a cloth. With a proud gleam in her eyes, she lifted the fabric. "This," she said, "is the piece I'm most proud of, but ever since it was finished, I've never found the right person to wear it. I've tried models, celebrities, but none of them captured the spirit I imagined. Then I saw you in Chris's video, and I knew this dress was meant for you." The moment I slipped into that vintage dress, I could feel it too. It wasn't just about the fit. It was a perfect harmony between style and soul. What once seemed like an ordinary floral pattern came to life on me, exuding poise and warmth. Claire immediately invited me to be the finale model for her upcoming vintage runway show in that very dress. I was ecstatic, giddy like a young girl chasing her dream for the first time. To prepare, I trained for 2 hours every day, practicing my walk and refining my posture. It wasn't easy at first. James would watch me, drenched in sweat, gently worrying, "Don't push yourself too hard." But I'd always smile and tell him, "I've lived most of my life just surviving. For the first time, I finally feel alive." He stopped trying to dissuade me. Instead, he became my quiet support, managing everything behind the scenes, making sure I had everything I needed. On the day of the show, I stepped onto the runway as the closing act. No one expected a woman past 60 to be the brightest presence on stage, but I wasn't nervous. My makeup was flawless, my steps sure and graceful, each movement filled with confidence and ease. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, all focused on me. In that moment, I felt 20 again, bold, radiant, unstoppable. I spotted James in the front row, eyes full of pride and love, and just like that, my heart fluttered like a girl in love for the very first time. Soon after, the runway video of my fashion show went viral online. People weren't just amazed by my appearance. They were deeply moved by the way I refused to surrender to age, by the way I chose to live life on my own terms. They started calling me affectionately the vintage goddess. But what none of us expected was that James became a sensation too. A photo captured by a photographer showed him in the front row, eyes glowing with admiration as he watched me walk the runway. It quickly spread across social media. Chris also posted a video, editing together clips of James bustling around backstage, helping me with everything from shoes to accessories. The comments poured in, "This is what real love looks like." When James and I read that one, we looked at each other and burst into quiet laughter. It was both touching and a little surreal. After that, we were invited to more and more fashion events. Time passed quietly, but it never dimmed the light in our eyes. Then one day, I saw Rachel again at another vintage fashion show. The show had just ended, the audience still seated, when she suddenly burst out from a corner and dropped to her knees in front of me. It had been another 6 months since we last saw her. She looked like a completely different person, hair disheveled, face haggard, much thinner than before, with eyes full of exhaustion. Defeat. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice already breaking. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she spun around and shouted toward the corner. "Owen, come on. Say hi to Grandma and Grandpa." She had brought Owen with her, but the boy clung desperately to the wall, crying uncontrollably. "I don't want them," he screamed. "I want to go home. Home. I want Grandpa Jay and Grandma Anna." Rachel tried to pull him over, but he wouldn't budge. In her frustration, she began pushing and shoving him, even hitting him in desperation. Owen's sobs grew louder, echoing across the now empty runway venue. The chaotic scene drew attention instantly. People surrounded them, murmuring, pointing, whispering. With the help of security staff, we managed to bring Rachel and Owen into a quiet backstage lounge, finally away from the noise. She told us what had happened over the past 6 months. David had been arrested for bribery and corruption. He'd been sentenced to 8 years in prison. I froze for a moment, but the more I thought about it, the less surprised I was. David had always been arrogant and impulsive, chasing shortcuts instead of doing things right. For years, they'd used our accounts to build credit, grease palms, and curry favor. I'd warned him once, do what you're capable of. Don't try to fake your way through everything. But he just sneered. That's such old school thinking. These days, it's all about leverage and connections. If there's a shortcut, only a fool wouldn't take it. I remember that moment clearly, the quiet chill that crept through me. I knew trouble would come. Sure enough, he pulled the same stunt again to land a city development project. He even mortgaged their house to take out a loan and secure connections. He got the contract, but neglected the actual work. Drowning in dinners and booze, the project fell apart under his mismanagement, leading to huge financial losses. This was the inevitable end. Rachel sobbed. Since he went to prison, I've been afraid to even leave the house. The neighbors talk behind my back. Kids at school tease Owen. I'm falling apart. Mom, Dad, he's just a child. That environment is toxic for him. I want to bring him here to live with you. Her eyes were full of desperate hope. James answered calmly. Didn't Owen say he loves being with his real grandparents? Well, now your little family is back together. Seems like a perfect fit. Rachel panicked. Dad, they don't know how to care for him. They don't even love him. They don't know what he's allergic to. Last time he had a severe reaction to nuts, he went into shock. They weren't even home. They left him alone. If I hadn't gone back in time, it could have been fatal. James shook his head, unmoved. That's your problem. If his grandparents are careless, then, as his mother, it's on you to be more responsible. Rachel grasped for another angle. But the loan David took, it's coming due. I have no way to repay it. The bank's going to foreclose on the house. Where are Owen and I supposed to live? James remained steady. Once the house is auctioned, you'll get whatever's left over should be enough for you and your son to get by. David's childhood home is still there. You won't end up on the street. Rachel's face turned pale, rage and despair battling behind her eyes. She turned to me in tears. Mom, please say something. I looked at her expressionlessly and replied, calm and clear, your father's right. Rachel froze in place, and in that instant, she realized this time there would be no turning back. She covered her mouth and ran out, sobbing. The media, as always, was quick to seize a story. The moment Rachel knelt before me at the fashion show, someone captured it on video. It spread like wildfire online, and just like that, James and I went viral again. Only this time, the praise was drowned out by criticism. Keyboard warriors flooded the internet with condemnation. They argued that in today's world, with sky-high living costs and suffocating pressure, young people were already overwhelmed, juggling careers and parenting. Even the smallest bit of help from elderly parents, whether it's cooking dinner or picking up a child from school, could make a world of difference. But what about us? They said we were selfish, choosing comfort and leisure while turning a blind eye to our daughter's struggles. According to them, our behavior was cold, ungrateful, even cruel. As these voices grew louder, Those who once called me the vintage goddess grew quiet. Some even began to question themselves. They started imagining what it would feel like if their own parents did the same, if they too let go and stepped back from family obligations. Suddenly, our story didn't seem so admirable to them. The tide of support slowly shifted into a wave of judgment. Yet amid the noise, a different kind of voice quietly began to emerge. These were people closer to our age, those who, like us, had been tethered to their adult children's lives. Unpaid caretakers, washing dishes, changing diapers, handing over savings bit by bit. People who couldn't even enjoy a nice dinner or buy a new dress without first checking their children's mood. They began to speak up. Raising children was our duty, but does that mean we're also obligated to be lifelong servants, free nannies, personal chefs, even after they've built their own families? That sentiment resonated deeply. What began as a murmur turned into a rising chorus, a quiet yet undeniable shift in the public conversation. James was worried about me at first. He feared the emotional whiplash from adoration to outrage might be too much for me to bear. But I wasn't troubled at all. I simply smiled and said, "We never set out to become public figures. The applause was a beautiful accident we experienced, and that was enough. If it fades away tomorrow, I'll have no regrets because there are still so many places waiting for us to explore. Even the most breathtaking scenery is only a pause along the way. You take in its beauty, and then you keep moving. Clinging to it would only weigh you down. Life always lies ahead." I found peace. It didn't mean I was going to let those cruel accusations spiral unchecked. So I sat down and wrote an article. I wrote for 5 years. We lived in our daughter's home, caring for a family, never daring to spend money on ourselves. One day, just because we were in a good mood and it happened to be our wedding anniversary, we bought a bottle of wine to celebrate. What happened next? We were accused of being wasteful and extravagant. All the while, they were using our retirement accounts to buy $6,000 watches and $5,000 designer bags. Our savings were emptied to support their lifestyle, and yet we were scolded for spending a few dollars on a bottle of discounted wine. Even when Rachel tried to win us back, it was still laced with manipulation disguised as affection. We chose to walk away, not out of abandonment, but because we finally realized sacrifice is not love and entitlement is not filial piety. As I typed out those words, the memories no longer stung. The pain had faded. What remained was clarity. Strangely enough, I even felt a bit of gratitude for Rachel and David's actions. Because of them, James and I were finally able to break free from the fear of aging, of illness, of dying alone. We stepped into a new chapter of life, one that belonged wholly to us. After I published the article, Chris left a comment beneath it. He wrote about his time living near us, the early mornings when James made breakfast, the quiet moments when I hung laundry in the garden, the photos he took of me smiling in a vintage dress under the sunlight. He wrote that they didn't abandon anyone. They simply learned, after being hurt, how to protect themselves. And just like that, the anger in the comments began to subside. One line stood out among the replies. "When you become a parent and your own child treats you the same way, will you still think their choice was selfish?" Because that's all we had done. After being drained, dismissed, and discarded, we simply chose to stop giving more of ourselves away. Even in old age, we still have the right to choose the life we want to live.